What is going on, everybody? I hope you are doing well. My name is Andy with Bulwarks today. Let's get started. Now, if you remember from last week's video, there are a number of areas on the hull here that need to get reworked. There's probably a handful of old holes that were filled with who knows what. If I had to guess, I'd say it's some sort of like an epoxy putty, thickened epoxy. There's also a number of little chips and dings, where the hull that has been peppered by someone's lawnmower, not mine, as well as just overall the hull itself in spots. The fairing wasn't done all that great. I mean, overall it looks good, but it wasn't done perfect, And if you're going to go through all the trouble and the hassle on a project like this, why would you skimp on that last little step? So at this point, I think I've pretty well decided that I'm going to end up having to repaint this hull, which is kind of a shame. I mean, for the most part, I mean, it's a brand new paint job that's on here. Well, it's not brand new. I mean, it was done maybe 10, 11 years ago, but it's never seen the water. I don't think it's really even ever seen sunlight. But, by the time I go through and do all these patches on here, do some of the fairing and do all the little chips and fill all the old holes, without knowing what kind of paint was used on here, and specifically what color of that brand of paint was used, I don't want to take the chance of having this thing, when it's all said and done, come out looking like a polka dot. Having it be all blotchy and patchy and just kind of looking like hell. So really the only way that I'm going to be able to get a uniform color on here is just to do all the repairs, and then when it's all said and done, come back and shoot a new color around the whole thing so it's all uniform and consistent. So before I can get started doing any of the repairs on here, and certainly before I can even think about what kind of painting process I'm going to have to go through with this, I need to determine what kind of material is on the surface right now, specifically whether it's a 1 or a 2-part paint. Now, the reason that's important is because, let me back up a little bit here. A 1-part paint does not use a catalyst. It's just that. You basically take the material out of the can, apply it to the surface, and it essentially air cures. Now, a 2-part paint uses a catalyst or an activator along with typically some thinners, so that it can be applied in a nice smooth coat. So now the reason that's important is because a 1-part paint can be applied pretty much over any surface. It doesn't matter. You can apply it over gel coat, you can apply it over other 1-part paints as well as other 2-part paints. Very, very universal in what that material can be applied to. Now, when you're talking about wanting to apply a 2-part paint, this is where it can get a little tricky. A 2-part paint can only be applied over other 2-part surfaces, whether it be a 2-part primer or other 2-part paints. It cannot be applied over a 1-part paint or primer. What will happen if you do that is the chemicals that are in the 2-part concoction, what they'll do is they will melt and wrinkle and bubble the existing or the 1-part surface. So not cool. The way that you usually find that out is you'll be halfway down the boat if you're spraying it or rolling it, however you happen to be applying it. But you'll get halfway down the boat and you'll take a peek back where you first started, and it'll look like an orange, and it's just an absolute disaster. At that point, the only thing you can do is just come back and scrape it all right back off and start over. So it's pretty important that you figure out what it is that you're going to be applying your new paint on top of. So to determine what kind of material is on the surface that you're looking to repaint, whether it's a 1 or a 2-part paint, you need to do what's called a solvent test. And essentially what that is you're going to be taking the thinner or the reducer from the line of paint that you want to use. You're going to be taking that and soaking a rag or a cotton ball or what have you, and then taping it onto the side of the hull for half an hour. After that half an hour has passed, then you basically peel the cotton ball or wet, soaked rag off, and you look at the surface. If it's wrinkled or bubbled or the paint has started to melt, well, that tells you that the two material, the existing material and the paint that you want to use, are not compatible. In other words, that tells you that you're dealing with a 1-part paint. Now, if you were to apply that cotton ball, rag, whatever, and leave it on there for half an hour, peel it back off, if it's just slightly soft, but that's it, but it hasn't started to bubble or flake or, kind of go funky on you, then you're fine. That means you're dealing with a 2-part paint. So for the most part, I generally prefer to spray all grip, or actually specifically all craft. And because I like to work with all grip, you have two different choices as far as the solvents that you can use for doing this testing here. Now, you can either use their T006, which is their standard epoxy reducer. That's going to be the reducer that you would use for any of their primers. And in my case, typically my final primer that I shoot is 545. But you also have the option of using what's called their standard top coat reducer, which is their T003. And this is what you're going to use depending on what kind of temperature it is you're working in. This is going to be the thinner or the reducer that you're going to use more oftentimes than not. You know, around here, whenever I'm spraying, I'm usually between 60 and 80 degrees. So the T003 is what I use almost exclusively when I'm looking to reduce my actual paint. But for the what I found, and I can't say that this is right or better or worse, but for what I found is that I prefer to use the T006 for doing this solvent test, just because it seems to be a little bit more of a harsh reducer. So if anything is going to damage the surface of the existing paint, this is going to be it. If it holds up to this, you're going to be golden. So as I mentioned, the reducer I'm going to be using here is their T006, their epoxy reducer. And all I did is I took a paper towel, folded it up, and I'm just going to soak this, and then I'm going to tape it to the hull here. And since I've got gloves on, I found it's a lot easier to try and get the tape over on the hull where you need it without the gloves than it is with the gloves. So. And once you start seeing it kind of drip off the edge here, well, then your rag is pretty well saturated. But I am going to shake off a little bit of the excess just so it doesn't run down the hull and into the bottom paint. And just to make sure that I've got good surface contact, I am going to run another piece of tape this way so that there is plenty of pressure. If this is going to bubble the surface, I want to make sure that I know that it's going to bubble the surface. So there's one little word of caution I want to, I guess, bring up when we're talking about doing this solvent test, is that once you actually do the test, you're pretty well committed to having to go down that road of having to repaint the boat. The reason being is because, in this example, if this is a one-part paint, we do that solvent test, basically what's going to happen is that little section on the hull is going to be destroyed. I mean, because if the paint melts and flakes and bubbles, that area where you do the patch is, for the most part, destroyed. So, it can be fixed. I mean, well, pretty much anything can always be fixed, but it just becomes a real big hassle if you're like just kind of trying to decide, well, do I want to paint? Do I not want to paint? Trying to do this as just kind of a fun little experiment. Just be aware that wherever it is that you do that, if it actually damages the surface, it's pretty well cooked. You're going down that road whether you really want to or not. Now, just as a suggestion, if you just want to kind of, for your own curiosity, do a little test, find a very obscure area somewhere on the hull that really no one would see, maybe, well, wherever. I mean, every boat is different. But find a very obscure part of the boat to do this test on. So just in case you kind of change your mind, you're in an area where you can do a kind of somewhat of a quick and dirty repair, and really, for the most part, no one will see it. So I just wanted to mention that just as a little bit of forewarning here. And so now, while I'm going to let that sit and cook or do its thing for the next half an hour, there's another little test that you can do, and this more so applies to like older paint surfaces. But essentially what you're doing is you just want to make sure that the new material that you're applying on top of the old isn't going to somehow get pulled off and take the old parts of the old surface with it. So you're just kind of more or less testing the adhesion and the bonding strength. And the way that you do that is pretty simple. Again, do this in an obscure area just in case the result from the test kind of changes your mind. But essentially all you're going to do is you're going to take any kind of a straight edge in a razor and you're going to make a series of cuts, you know, about every ½ inch apart. I like to do about 5 or 6 lines. Then you're going to come back at it in the opposite direction so that you're essentially creating a bunch of little squares or diamonds. And the theory is that in our next step, when we come back over with some really strong tape, is that if there's any kind of a bonding issue, that tape is going to pull one of these little squares off. Now, if you do this test and you pull your tape, nothing comes up, everything stays right where it's supposed to be, then you know your surface is in good shape. You know, well, at least the adhesion is good. So, like I mentioned, for this test, all grip in their manual they outline. I think they suggest 3 different types of paint, and they're more or less all clear packing tapes. I'm guessing the reason they're suggesting them is because they have a really high. They're really sticky. They have a good bite to them when you put them down on the surface. Now, I don't have any one of those, and honestly, for me to go find or track a roll of that tape down, I'd probably have to drive an hour to a store. So I'm not going to do that. But I am going to use shrink wrap tape. And if you have ever used shrink wrap tape, you know that this has got to be one of the strongest tapes on this planet. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tape. Here's all the cuts that I made here. I'm just going to take the tape and lay it down flat on the surface, and try and work out any of the air bubbles that are in there and just get a good surface contact with the tape. Now, I don't know if the camera is able to pick this up here, but if you look, you can actually see the cut marks or the cut pattern into the tape. So press it down really, really good. And then when you pull this off, basically what they want you to do is just to do one quick snap on the tape and then rip the whole thing off at once. And it doesn't need to sit on there for any period of time, so it looks like it's been down good. Let's just give her a rip. No problems. And as you saw, I mean, there were no issues here, and I wouldn't expect there to be. This is my test panel. I use this whenever I'm trying out, experimenting with new paints, new primers, or whatever it may happen to be. So this is my test panel. I didn't want to cut the grid into the boat. I don't know why. It's just something felt wrong about doing that. But I have no problem messing up my test board. So, but anyways, I just want to show you real quick, how that adhesion test works. So it's been about a half an hour. So let's go over and check out our solvent test. All right, well, let's see what we've got going on here. Good. Good. So as you can see here, there's still some solvent dripping down here, but the surface is undamaged. I will say, even though this it's passed the test, this surface right here where the rag was is still going to be very, very tender, just because it's been in direct contact with straight solvent for the last 30-40 minutes. So when I'm wiping this off, I'm just going to pat it dry, and then in about 10-15 minutes, then I'll come back with my fingernail and just kind of give it a scratch. The patch was right here, but I'll come and give it a scratch. And well, I'm doing it right now, and it's fine. For me, that is awesome news, because if this had wrinkled and done whatever, that would mean that before I could come in and do my priming and my painting, every stitch of this old paint would have to be sanded off and removed. I don't have to do that. This will be the first boat out of the last 4 boats that I've painted that first time I don't have to strip the entire hull down to bare glass, which is Awesome. That's going to save a lot of shoulder work, and my shoulders were going to be very grateful. So in any event, so this is good, very good news for me, because it held up. Now all I have to do for the most part is, after I'm done with my fairing and the repairs, then I just need to come back, scuff this surface up with some, let's see, I'm going to prime it first, so I'll scuff it with some like 180, 150, probably 180 grit. Tack it, clean it, do all that other fun stuff, and then I can spray my 545, and then finally my top coat. And on that note, I think I'm going to wrap this video up. Now I'm going to try and end the week on a positive note. Quit while you're ahead, right? So if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to leave those down below, and I'll do my best to get back with you. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it helpful, feel free to share this on social stuff. And yeah, till next time, have a great weekend. I'll see you again on next Sunday morning. Take care. See you then.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.